You're live.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Accetta, and I'm teaching a watercolor class here at the Greenville Center for Creative Arts in Greenville, South Carolina. And it'll be on Wednesday, starting in January, Wednesday mornings from 9:30 to 11:30. And so today I'm doing a demonstration of a portrait. Now, we don't always do portraits in class. We do landscapes, we do still life, but this is a portrait because I love doing portraits myself. And so what we have here is a very careful drawing of a woman named Pam who has a glorious hat on, which really attracted me to her. Now, the drawing is sort of dark right now because I wanted you to be able to see. And the drawing is not just like edges of the face, but also I have marks where there's a change of color or tone or value in the skin so that I'm aware of the whole map of the painting. So I'm going to take a kneaded eraser and sort of lighten all this up. When you paint watercolor, even if you paint loosely, you want to have a good drawing so that you know where everything is, so you know where to leave things out. So the drawing skill is quite important. So I will show you real quick. I'm working from a photograph, and this is Pam, and she has just the most fun hat on. Now, when you're painting in watercolor, every single artist uses a different color palette. I have mine, and I use most of my skin tones are raw sienna, burnt sienna, quinacridone rose. I have some cobalt blue in there. I have some burnt sienna, and I have some lavender, and all these colors in the skin. So I'm not going to start with any detail, but I want to find the darks of her face to start with. And so I'm going to come down with glasses, and I recently have been using more of a flat brush than a round brush. I kind of just like, it just cuts in the edges real well, and this looks a little dark, I realize, but when I drop in some of the skin tones in here, you can see that it warms it up. Now I'm going to soften the edge, because anytime you are painting something, if you have a curve, that's considered a soft edge. If it's a hard edge, it's usually like at the edge of something, like the edge of her glasses or the edge of underneath her skin, where her skin goes back on the side of her face. And I'm not going to worry about detail yet. I'm just coming in and kind of molding in the tones of her face. And I'm going to soften this edge where her cheek is. Now, the thing about watercolor that I always tell my students is it's really easy to go darker, but it's really hard to go lighter. So I usually try to err on, even though I want the values and they're important, I try to err on the side of being a little on the lighter side, because one other thing to be aware of is that watercolor dries lighter. Acrylics dry darker, so you need to be aware of that. So I'm trying to mold her face and get the feeling of the curves of her skin, and again doing a soft edge to make the curves, and then following down here and finding the hard edges, which is the bottom of her chin, and create the shape of her. Now, it's always interesting. This is my first video, and I've been teaching for a lot of years, and it's very hard sometimes for an artist to learn how to speak and paint at the same time, because you're using both sides of your brain. So sometimes you start making nonsense. And if I do, I apologize, and you just have to live with it. So again, you can see I'm finding the darks of her face. And when you learn portraiture and you start learning the parts of the lights and darks of the face, there's usually 5 basic darks in the face. And it's the eye, which is, think of the eye socket, under the nose, under the upper lip, under the lower lip, and under the chin. And those are the ones that you want to look for. So right now with her, I want to kind of use maybe a little smaller brush here. Always try to use the biggest brush you have available. so that you're not using like a one hair brush for a foot to paint in. So I'm going to come in and kind of get in her eye in here. The eyes are, you know, the window to the soul. So it's very important to get that in fairly soon because we're trying to get the feel of what she looks like. Now, as far as a likeness in a portrait, that's always a tricky thing. People don't know what they look like. I learned that after many years as a portrait artist. And so people, you know, you can go in and someone says to me, oh, well, I never take a good photograph. Well, you learn as a portrait artist that they probably don't know what they look like. And sometimes I've actually turned away commissions because I thought I'm never, ever going to get what the person thinks. Now, I'm coming back in real quickly right now while it's still a little damp so that my edges are soft in forming her face. Gonna kind of go across, and even though she has wonderful red lipstick on, I just want to get a dark in there to get the shape of her lip and just kind of to feel what her lip, the feeling of her lip. Now this is going very quickly here, and you always don't, you can get the basics in, but you always want to go back in, and they can take, I just did a portrait that I figured out it was 144 hours I put in it. Now it was very large, it was a full figure. I had a painting within a painting. So it took me a lot of hours to get all that in, but you can see how I'm starting to develop her face. And a little bit of a likeness I think we have. You sometimes lose that and come back and find it as an artist. Now this side of her face is where all the light is, so I'm being a little bit careful about where I put the darks. And she has glasses on, and it's kind of fun because she's peering up from under the glasses, and I'm less concerned about actual color than I am about value. Value is the light and dark that you see in someone's face. And so I'm paying more attention to the value. I can come in and change the light and dark in her face and the colors as I work. But right now, I'm going to just kind of get the idea of it in and the feel of her face. And there is a wonderful shadow that I'm going to go ahead and put in right now under her wonderful hat. And so I'm going to just wet this down so I have a soft edge, and I'm going to just sweep a little dark in under the hat. Now, one of the things everybody wants to do right away is put in every single wrinkle. And that's kind of the last thing you would do. If you've ever baked a cake, you don't put all the decorative parts on right away. You have to bake the cake and you put the flat icing on first. And then you can come back and put roses and flowers. So I'm kind of going to go around and just kind of find the shape of her face and where her hair is coming down. And let's see here, come and find the dark under her chin, because that's really going to make her pop out here, finding this dark under here. Now, a good thing is when you have it still a little bit damp, you have soft edges, so you can get sort of a curved, moldy feel. The hard thing is, if you want a harder edge, like I want a little bit of a harder edge under her chin, but I don't really want to wait for it to dry. And that's a very hard thing for an artist, especially a watercolor artist, is to watch paint dry. We find that difficult. So I usually have 2 or 3 paintings ready to go at one time so I can put one aside and then work on while parts of it dry. And that's also very dependent upon the weather. We're in South Carolina this summer with the humidity. If I was outside painting, it was really, really slow and drying, and it holds a whole lot of dark of water. And one thing I did mention, I don't know, in my palette, you always want to have enough paint out. Very often, beginning artists tend to be a little bit stingy, and they only put like a drop out, and then all of a sudden you have to go and mix another color, and meanwhile something is drying and you kind of have a mess. So you always want to err on the side of putting too much color on, and you can always use it later. So I'm just getting the shapes of her of parts of her hair, etc. Now, interestingly, she has beautiful white hair, and you can't see it now, but she has some funny pinky tinges in it at places. I am going to pick up, I think, some rosy purple here, and she has a purple kind of jacket on, and I'm just going to define that a little bit just so we get where her shoulder is and kind of loose there, and then I'm going to come across it over here and do the same thing. And she has part of her shoulder is actually showing through here. I'm just going to let it bleed out, but I just want to give her a little bit of shape up in that area. And then what's really important now is the negative space. Negative space is the area that is behind something. People call it the background. So what I really want to do is come in with some negative space color, kind of a neutral, maybe err on a little bit of a cooler side of it. And I'm mixing a raw sienna with some cobalt blue. And I want to define around her, that's it, knocking down my thing here. I want to define around her hair so we see it. And I'll pick up a couple of the colors that I've used in there. I'm not being real picky about it. And just kind of bring it down. But you see how that brought her hair forward very quickly. So on the same side, I'm going to do the same thing. Maybe it's actually a little lighter over here on the photo, but you know, the photo is just a reference. I think I really want to put the same kind of colors in that I had before. Now what's going to be very tedious is when I get to her hat, because there's all this sheer fabric, which is one of the things that really attracted me to this picture of Pam, is because I wanted to showing this sheer fabric, and it's a little bit tricky, so I won't be able to do much of the detail now, but what I think I'm going to do is kind of get the negative shapes around here. She's a wonderful puppeteer and seamstress, and so many of these hats she creates on her own, and they're just so much fun, and she has such great personality. She lives in Ohio, where I just moved from, so I want to kind of get the negative spaces around her hat first. Let's see what I have up there. There's kind of a negative space there. Put a little bit of the rose in, come around here. And you see how I'm starting to develop the area around the hat. And that sort of defines the hat. Now, one of the biggest things in the hat is this fabulous feathery red, purpley, magenta, and then there's some really cool green things. But I have to wait a minute. I'm going to pick up the bead because I'm working upright where it's dripping. I want to put this brim in, but I'm going to skip the under part because it's wet next to her face, and I don't want it to be. I don't want it to bleed, so I'm going to find across this brim first. So I have to, if I want a sharp edge of all these feathers next to her, I'm going to have to wait till it dries. So we have to be patient, which is probably difficult when you do live in a watercolor, because if you do time lapse, you can just sit and wait, but not so much here. So I'm kind of get these shapes in. And that sort of gives the feel of her hat. And notice I'm not doing any detail again. That's really important. I don't want to get into the detail. So now I'm going to pick up some quinacridone red, mix that with a little purple. I have some magenta back there, but I forgot I brought it with me. And I'm going to get some opera. Now, opera is an iridescent watercolor made by Holbein. Other ones make it, but I'm a Holbein. I love it. Glows in the dark almost. So I'm just going to come and paint over whole pieces of feathers here, just kind of to get the feel. And I can define some details later. I just want to get a little bit of feel of light and dark. And where am I? I get lost sometimes. I'm trying not to do that. And there's some paler pink. So in watercolor, pink is made of red and white. And in watercolor, your white is the actually the water. If you can help, I mean, there is white watercolor, but sometimes it never quite has the iridescence and beauty that using pure watercolor does. Let's see, where am I? Oh, okay, I'm over here. So we have a little feather that comes here, and there's one there, and there's one there. And there's like a dark one in there. Kind of come here, getting lost in the feathers. And I'll come down, there's kind of a dark spot around there. And there's one that comes here, and there's this great one that comes right across in the front, in front of her glasses. And I think that's kind of a fun little thing that it does. There. Okay. And there's also one that goes way out here, and there's one in here. Now, I'm going to come around and pick up these little beads because gravity is pulling them down, and I don't want a dark spot at the end. So now what I think I'm going to do is get some of the negative spaces of the dark part of her hat. Now, usually I make my own blacks out of phthalo green and alizarin crimson, or a burnt sienna and a ultramarine. Make really good blacks, but I'm going to cheat today because I don't want to move all the things on my palette, and I'm just going to use a little bit of Payne's gray to sort of get the feel of the brim of her hat. And if it bleeds in a little bit on this, I don't care. And I think this hat is made like with a chimney pipe. It's just really interesting what she does with these. And I have a whole collection of her photos of her with her fun hats on. Just kind of getting a feel of this. And then it's very light gray down here. And there's some feathery stuff that goes in front of that. So I'm going to sort of skip around there. And one of the things that you want to do when you're painting in watercolor, you want to do a glaze, which is like a glazed donut. It's over a cooked donut. You're going to put another color over, but you want the undercolor to be bone dry. And how you know it's bone dry is you take the back of your hand like you took your kids sick, take their temperature. And if it's room temperature, it's dry. If there's a little bit of chill to it, that means there's still water in it. And the reason you don't want to go in when there's still water is because then you're mixing the paint instead of letting it sit on top. So I want to go ahead and get a little bit of this. This is dry, but I don't mind. It's along her face here, this brim. And, you know, in school, I would have probably gotten in trouble for going outside the lines right there. But what I'm going to do is just take a damp brush and pick that up. And I think let that dry. And then there's some really cool, like, fabric things happening up there. And I'm going to clean a little bit of my palette up so I can get some nice, pretty, it's a kind of a very light green. I'm using cobalt teal with a lot of water. And I just want to get the sort of the feel of the other colors that are in this, so I know where they are. I'm not doing the detail now. I'm going to come and do those later, but I just want that feel of it, so I know what's next to what. Just getting some of those in now. This is all dark, and I forgot. So I think there's actually more red up in there. Maybe. Where am I? Okay, this goes this way. That one goes out that way. So there's a little bit of red in there. I'll put that one in. And there's a little red that goes out in there. And then they're very pale, just to feel the idea that there's fabric up in here that I'll get her on. Now, I think I want to go ahead and try to get her glasses in, which is going to be a little tricky because I have to have a very steady hand. And so I'm going to use a round brush for this that has a good point. I could use my I have a couple Kolinsky sables, and this was my Kolinsky sable. These are the ones that are so expensive, and I wait till they go on sale if I want to get one. But I just wanted to get kind of where her glasses are. Now if I can enlarge this a little bit and see where. Now it's not as dark as they really are. They're going to be a lot darker later. But I need to find the placement because it all relates to things. So you can paint something very dark and very light, but then you put something different next to it, it changes the value. So I'm just going to get this in there. And there's like a highlight right here I'm looking for. Now when I started painting, especially with portraits, and I still do this a lot, I very often will turn the photo I'm working from, or if I'm working live, it's a little bit harder to do that. I turn it upside down. And that makes me look at the values and the shapes and not the detail. So we got her glasses in there, but you see how putting her glasses in very dark made all the skin tones a lot lighter? So now I realize I want to come in and find some of the darker skin areas of the face. So we have definitely the eye in here. And the other eye in there. And it's very, very dark on this one side. You don't really see the whites of the whites of the eyes. Now that's another thing. All the students want to put whites of the eyes. Nobody's whites of the eyes are white. Hold a piece of paper up to your eye and you will see it is not white. It's usually a blue or a gray or a warm gray even. So I'm going to kind of just find some of these and define the darks a little bit more and show a little bit deeper in them. And again, I'm not going to try to do all the details yet or all her, sorry Pam, I know you have wrinkles, but they're character. They're beautiful, beautiful lines. It gives your face such character. So we'll call them character lines and not wrinkles. I'm at the age, I understand that too. So I'm just defining a little bit more, and I'm going to pull some in here because really what happens is this then became much darker when you compare it to the glasses, which is still not as dark as they're going to be because it's not completely a black yet. And come in here and find a little bit more the dark around the eye here and pull that out. And then let's find a little bit of the dark under the nose. Now, Pam has a wonderful nose ring that I don't want to lose. That's very brave of her. I can't even imagine doing that because I have pierced ears, but a nose ring would put me under because I always have a runny nose from allergies. So that would not be a good choice for me. But I love it for her and I don't want to lose it. So I'm coming in and I'm finding that underneath her nostril. And again, defining this as I go under the nose. And then there's some lighter, a little bit of lighter, and ooh, I picked up a little bit too much dark on that one. Want a little more warmer color in there. And then I realize, then you say, okay, now her lip has gotten lighter because it's compared to the other darks. So I'm going to come in here with some, and find that really pretty red that she has on her lipstick that goes so well with her hat. And kind of define her lip with that. And now I realize I want to come over on the side of her face over here and bring in a little bit darker here. And I'm going to use kind of a little bit of a lavender with some of the cobalt. And pick up a little bit of warmer in here. A little bit of rosiness in her cheek. Then immediately I say, oh, well now since I got this so light, so much darker the negative space around the shape of her face under her hair is now too light. So then you have to come back in here and really darken this to give the face the shape. Again, looking at negative shape, I'm going to soften some of these edges. With her hair in there. And now I'm going to pick up some more dark over here because the same thing happened. So I'll get to some of the dark behind the face over here. And see how that pops out the face by putting the dark in there? And I'm going to take a damp brush and just soften where the hair goes in here so it's not too hard-edged. And the hair is really darker on, obviously you see the light is coming from the left. So I'm going to come in with another neutral and maybe add a little bit of yellow ochre to that. Blonde, light hair, you want to look at the darks in it. Maybe some lavender even. How are we on time here, Liz?
3:25.
Okay, you just tell me when I should stop talking.
Maybe 10 more minutes.
So are you getting a pretty good view? Seeing how it's developing? Okay, that's great. And that hair then made the background lighter. So I have to add a little more dark to that to define that. So you're kind of, it's a push-pull thing. If you push something darker, something else sometimes has to go darker, or the other way. And something that looks too dark, you put a dark behind it and all of a sudden it becomes very light. And so I'm thinking I'm going to, before this dries, soften all this and let that just bleed down. And she has kind of a little bit of shape to the hair in here. But I don't want to draw every single hair. I just want to draw kind of the native shapes and to get just a feel of the movement of her hair. And I'm not drawing actual hairs, I'm drawing what's in between. Sure, I'm getting tired.
Not too bad.
So right now, I haven't put an eyebrow in, I noticed, so I'm going to just grab a little bit of the neutral and just kind of follow where the eye is in here. Soft, just a little bit soft, just so I know where it is. It's not exact, and I'm not too worried about that yet. All right, now I think I'm at a point I kind of have to stop a little bit and slow down because I don't want to end up having too many things bleed. Find maybe a little more of the nostril here, a little darker under there, and I can get a little bit under her lip here. So you can sort of see where we're headed. And right now, because I didn't carefully put in the darks of her eyes, she's a little bit not looking the same direction, but I can fix that later too. And I'll bring that in, but I can darken it. If I left this light, that made it look like one eye's looking over to the right and the other eye's looking over the other side. So there's also a little bit of a cast shadow from her glasses on this. And I can see the cast shadow comes down here also. And a little bit darker under there. And this gets really dark up in here. But there's a highlight on these glasses I don't want to lose. So I'm going to be careful not to lose that. But see, everything changes value when you start getting in darker darks. Now this is the time I'd stop and say, does anybody have any questions? So you can email the center or email me. And I'd be glad to give you some, answer any questions on this, but I think I've got it. I do think I have a somewhat of a likeness. Now, one of the things people always say, can you erase watercolor? Yes and no. You can pick something up with a damp brush, pick up a highlight. But I noticed that I kind of got a little out of the line of the drawing on her lip. So I'm going to take a damp Q-tip and I'm going to pull this up. Now my water's a little dirty. It's probably better if I didn't use dirty water, but I'll define this later, but I want to make sure I don't lose it, the shape of it right now. I also see that I need to come back up in here and find this dark. And that changes everything again. So now everything is again relative. That made these darks have to be darker. And a little bit darker up in here. Same as down there, and I don't know, if it's okay, I'm gonna have to stop for a minute and let some things dry. Now, another thing that I could talk to you about before we go much farther in this is working from photographs. As an art, I have a degree in art, and so I spend a lot of time working from live models. And it's always good to be able to work from a live model. But very often, when the longer a person sits, the stiffer they look, especially if you're doing children. And so I also do a lot of performers and dancers and drummers, and I can't very well say, hold that leap when I paint you. So I have to work from photographs. The thing that you need to learn from working from photographs is learning when the photograph lies. Because the photographs, sometimes you can have photographic distortion, and you need to be a little bit aware of that. Think about photographic distortion as is Uncle Sam wants you, that big old finger pointing at you. That's a really good example of photographic distortion. And so you want to be aware of that. The second thing, if you're going to use photographs, I always recommend people to take 3 photographs. And even if you're using your iPhone, you can put your finger on the darkest spot, the lightest spot, and it changes the light meter, because our eyes, we can look at something very, very dark and adjust to it, or look at something very, very light to adjust it. The the camera's meter automatically adjusts to the average. So you want to be able to see in both the darks and the light. And so you want to take one with showing all your darks and all your lights, so you know exactly what you're looking at. And a camera can also, it looks at everything. So you have to learn, you don't necessarily want to paint everything. And so sometimes people say, well, that's just like the photograph. Well, you have to remember, art is a lie that tells the truth. So you don't need to make it exactly like the photograph. And you don't have to put everything in, especially in a portrait. That's the other thing. People think, oh, I have to put every single eyelash and everything to make it look like this person. Well, not necessarily, because in truth, if you look at there's my Q-tip. If you think of Andy Warhol's portrait of Marilyn Monroe, it's only 2 colors, and you know exactly who it is. Or think if you're walking down the street and you see somebody you know down the street, well, you can't see their eyelashes and all this detail. So it's really more about the planes of the face. I'm lighting a little bit up in there. It'll eventually have to go a little bit darker, and I'm using the Q-tip to soften. So it's really about the planes of the face. When you think about it, think about a black and white picture, where people put a lot of things now through filters, and you can change it. You know who it is, and you don't have to see every detail. Lighten up a little bit of that, get her cheek in here. She has a real pretty little dimple here. Just soften that, and soften this with a damp brush. And I don't know if I can go much farther. Is that okay?
Yeah, what
Great.
will you do to finish this?
What I'll do to finish this is I have to decide, first of all, what is important to me in this painting. Obviously, her face is very important, so I'll go back in and do a lot of detail in the face. But I'm in love with this hat too, and so I really want to get the sheerness that you can see the sheerness of all these little pieces of fabric, and I want to make sure I get them. Now, the other thing I'm going to probably do is, even though you may not see it, usually if you have another color in a painting, it would be picked up somewhere else in the painting. So everybody says, well, that's not my skin color. Well, your skin color changes depending where you are. If you have a red sweater on, you may have more red tones showing in your skin. So I'm going to bring some of that teal that I used up in here down and find some of the rose also. And depending how realistic I really want to go, I have to make that decision. I probably won't make the whole thing overall real, but I do want to get definitely her personality in her face, and I will spend more time doing some detail in there. And usually I'll go home and I'll look at something, and this is what we call, artists call looking at something with a fresh eye. Fresh eye means you look at it and you see things that you didn't see when you were painting it the day before. I actually remember I had the opportunity when I lived in Oklahoma City to meet Jamie Wyeth, who's Andrew Wyeth's son. And he would say he would be working on a painting of a person, and he would go into lunch, and then he'd come back outside to the building where his studio is, and he'd peek in the windows like he was looking at it for the first time. And I used to peek up in my studio when it was in the third story because I could say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that, and I didn't notice it yesterday. Now, very often artists, and I used to have a critique group of professional artists, that they would point things out and I go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't see that. And it's just a fresh eye. So I would have to look at this with a total fresh eye. And I'll probably come in, and finish this painting, and I promised Pam I'd send it to her if it turned out, and say, okay, what do I, where have I lost her in this one, or where do I need to put more darks in this, and how can I accentuate the cool nose ring that she has, and how dark is this next to this light, and now I'm seeing a whole lot of blue and a little bit of lavender down in here in her chin, but then as soon as I put that in, then I have to go down under her chin and darken that. So you can see how I'm adding those things to it. There she is. And these are some different pictures of her photograph, but she has, immediately right now I need to darken the side of her lip. Because she has such a funny little smirk, and I don't want to lose that. Because I got a little bit too dark on the other part, so I don't want to lose that little cute little smirk that she has. So get the dark in there. So that's about where I have to stop right now, and this is when I would go home and work on another painting and start another one. And so since I'm only doing one right now.
Yeah, if you, when you finish, send us a picture and we'll post it.
Okay, I'd be glad to do that.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.